If I had one day when I didn't have to be all confused, and I didn't have to feel that I was ashamed of everything, if I felt that I belonged someplace, you know?
Rebel, rebel, put on your dress. Rebel, rebel, your face is a mess. Rebel, rebel, how could they know? Hot trend.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another Blu-ray review, and this is about a film that I have been wanting to do a video of since before the beginning of my channel. This was one of the very first videos I actually ever wanted to make, and am now able to do so, and that is all about one of my favorite films of all time, and that is Rebel Without a Cause. This is the Blu-ray Digibook edition put out by Warner Brothers. This is, of course, is the film that the iconic James Dean is probably most known for. It is a film that has inspired me in so many different ways and has been very influential on a lot of personal philosophies in my life. And also, it's a film that I revisit a lot. I watch this film several times a year, and it still holds up. But I will get into all of that. First off here, I want to say that this Blu-ray edition is fantastic. This specific edition is still in print. You can still find the Digibook version. You can find the regular Blu-ray case version. They are rather affordable. This, I believe, is around $20. The regular one, it hovers around 10 or so. But I think the Digibook edition is worth it. There was also a big Ultimate James Dean collection that was put out a few years ago with the three major films that he did in his career. The first being East of Eden, the second being Rebel Without a Cause, and the third and last film being Giant. All of those films did get Digibook editions as well. That set that I was just talking about is out of print, so you cannot really find it, unless of course you look on eBay or other third-party sellers. But before we delve into the packaging, I want to talk some more about this movie. This film came out in 1955, was directed by Nicholas Ray, starring, of course, the late James Dean, and sadly the late Natalie Wood and late Sal Mineo. Those are the three young cast members, the three real stars of this film. And it is very interesting how a film of that time really relied on its young stars to carry its movie and for the narrative to really focus around them. If you are not familiar with this film, if you've never seen it before, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil any of the plot. I will just tell you that it takes place in a 24-hour time frame. James Dean is the new kid in town. He has to assimilate into the youth culture at the time at the local high school. He's also a rebel without a cause. He is a disgruntled, angsty teenager who is fighting against something that he can't quite explain. And it's really interesting once you peel back the layers of this film to really get at what this film is doing. There is so much great thematic work in this film. A lot of it is very contemporary. A lot of teenagers still go through a lot of the similar things that the teenagers in this film go through. The relationship with the parents, the relationship with authority, the relationship between the new youth generation and the previous generation. The film delves into that generation gap that seems to come around in every generation. The previous generation and the new generation always are separated by some type of existential gap. They cannot connect to one another. I see that happening now as well. This film is also set in the 1950s. For those of you not aware of, the 1950s was a rather oppressive decade when it comes to culture. Unless you were someone who was from the suburbs and was white, you lived in a very suppressed and a very oppressed world. If you were an African American or any racial or ethnic minority, you were oppressed. If you were a woman, you were relegated to certain parts of society and looked at in a certain way. If you were gay, queer, transgender, you were basically in the closet. Society wanted nothing to do with you. And a lot of those things are still explored today in our society. The relationship between these three characters is rather unique and rather, like I said, representative of the time. These teenagers are struggling in this world. They're struggling to find their place in the world. And that is kind of what being a teenager is like in every generation. You don't know if you're still a child or if you're an adult. The world doesn't treat you like you're an adult, and they don't treat you like you're a child. You're basically stuck in limbo from the age of 13 to 18. No one really knows how to treat you. And this film deals with a lot of that, and there's a lot of emotion in this film. This film is known particularly for James Dean's portrayal of the character of Jim in the film as a very emotional and erratic teenager. And what you have to know is that James Dean went to the acting school of the method acting in New York in the Actors Studio. And he learned from one of the famous teachers of method acting in Lee Strasberg. But not to really delve into method acting too much, all you need to know is that method acting is still used today. People like Leonardo DiCaprio use it, Daniel Day-Lewis uses it, and Robert De Niro uses it as well. And all of them went to this specific school to learn all those techniques. Essentially, if I could describe method acting, you're not just acting a part, you become that part. You become emotionally attached to that part, in the sense that you become that person that you're portraying. It's a rather a scary and rather interesting thing. You hear all kinds of stories about actors getting too deep into their roles and being difficult for them to come out of them. And James Dean was part of that same school at the time, the same generation of actors like Marlon Brando and Paul Newman and Montgomery Clift. And though he was part of that generation, and it's very sad that he passed away so young. He actually passed away a month before this movie came out in theaters. He died in a car crash. All of the main three actors in this film all died in tragic ways. Sal Mineo was stabbed to death in 1976. Natalie Wood famously drowned in 1981. That case is actually, I think, still ongoing, or they're reopening it up or something like that. All tragic incidences, especially that of James Dean. You could tell he was a star. He is amazing in the three films that we got from him. You could see just a combination of so many great things and such a wide range in his acting ability. It's really sad that we'll never get to see what he would eventually become. And a lot of the legend or iconography of James Dean, I think, is due, unfortunately, to his early death. That seems to happen with a lot of artists who die very young. Nicholas Ray is an interesting director. The bulk of his filmography is in the 1950s when he was making his best films. He was making Rebel Without a Cause, he was making Johnny Guitar, he made a film called Bigger Than Life, he also made one of the greatest film noirs of all time in A Lonely Place. Unfortunately for Nicholas Ray, his career kind of dissipated in the 1960s. He had a lot of internal demons he was battling when it came to alcohol consumption and drug use and things of that. Really derailed his career. He was also famously romantically involved with a lot of his female leads in his films. Most famously in this film particularly, he had a bit of a romance during the making of with young Natalie Wood, who was only 16 at the time. He was married to Gloria Graham at one point that he directed in A Lonely Place. That's a whole other story for a different time. Look that up if you have a chance. Overall, great cinematography as well. This film was shot in CinemaScope in 2:55:1 aspect ratio, so we're talking very wide angle lenses in this film, and it's very interesting to see a film shot like that at the time because CinemaScope had only been around for 2 years. The studios needed a new gimmick to put in the theaters to get people to come, so they basically instituted widescreen. The film on Blu-ray also looks really good. There are some elements there that kind of look a little wonky to me personally, but I think that is just inherent in the film itself. There was a brand new 4K scan of the original negative done at Warner Brothers. They did extensive restoration and color correcting, all in-house at their studio, so it looks probably the best we could possibly get it to look right now, and the sound also is great. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at this packaging. Here is the front cover, which has a great photo of James Dean, and the lettering here is kind of vertical versus the typical horizontal. Blu-ray banner up top, and this is of course a Digibook form, so it opens very much like a Digibook, and it is filled with pictures and and essays and all kind of stuff that is very, very interesting, particularly if you are a huge fan of this film, like I am, and of course a fan of James Dean, all about kind of, James Dean and how he kind of really just burst on the scene as this just absolute prodigy of an actor. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, just to give you a general gist of what this Digibook packaging contains. Here is the disc that is housed here in a usual plastic disc tray, which is really nice. Sometimes you get Digibooks and there's not even a disc tray on the back. The disc is just kind of in a flap, and it can get loose and kind of fall out and all that kind of stuff. Here is the back of the Digibook, containing all of the details, of course, all of the special features, and here you have a list of all of them, and this does carry over, I believe, all of the special features from the 2-disc DVD edition. It does have a new featurette, which is Dennis Hopper Memories from the Warner Lot, which is a nice little add-in, because I always like to get some new features when I get a new edition of a movie I already own. Kind of makes the whole rebuying worth it. It is a 44-page book, which you just looked at, and of course down here some more stills from the film and the usual credits and things like that. So this has been my review of Rebel Without a Cause.